Our guest today is Jon Marquet, who is a retirement plan consultant and also a JD with TrustPoint. And TrustPoint, as we all know, is one of our most valued longtime sponsors of this show. And Jon, it's so great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, Julie, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me back. I always have a really great time on your podcast, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. It goes fast. We got a lot covered. So we're just going to dive right in today, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So since we have had you on the show in the past, I think I'm just going to, like I said, I'm going to dive into my questions because we're going to talk about some tax planning strategies, right? And ways for business owners to protect themselves and plan a strategic transition, whatever that might look like for them. So maybe what we can start with is for you to just share with us, how is it that TrustPoint actually works with clients who are in the process of transition planning or exiting their business? Now, I know that not everybody that's a client with TrustPoint is a business owner, but a lot of them are. And that's kind of a different animal, right? So let's start with that.
Yeah, for sure. Great question. Julie, as you know, and I know we've talked about it before on the podcast, at TrustPoint, we have a lot of different folks with a lot of different expertise. So when we start working with a client, particularly a client who's exiting their business, we really try to figure out how we can best add value. And then the idea is to try to get the right people and the right expertise at the table. So, as you know, it's often very case by case, very client specific, and it really depends where we come in the exit journey. Sometimes we come in early in the process and we can help with the whole exit planning enterprise, right? We can help build the team and really work together to get the business ready and move it through an exit. But often, and I know we've mentioned this before because it comes up a lot in our business, often, and particularly so when private equity is the buyer, which we're really, and I'm sure you're seeing too, we're really seeing all the time. Often we're brought into the process when the deals are fairly far down the road, sometimes just before or after an LOI, sometimes when they're negotiating with a number of potential buyers. And in those cases, what we will often see is there's been a lot of focus already on the business, on what it's worth, whether the offers are good, what LOI looks like. And sometimes even we've seen some prior efforts to get the business in the best position to sell. Those are obviously good situations. But when we're coming in at that fairly late point in the process, there often has not been a lot of focus on the business owners and their families, really, personal finances, and on how their personal financial life is going to change, is going to be impacted as a result of the transaction, because that can be really impactful.
Yes.
And it can make a big difference, right? And so what we're looking to do there is really talking to the business owner to try to optimize that result. And that's someplace we really excel, and we can really bring the right people with the right expertise to the table. We have certified financial planners. We have investment management people, which is really what you think of. I think most people think of when they think of a financial advisor. Those are folks that focus on investing the assets, making measured moves to maximize the returns. And then the other thing I'll mention, and stop me if I get going, because I can really get going on all the great things we can bring to the table. But the other thing we offer is trust administration. And that's something that I think really tends to distinguish us from other financial advisors. We have a number of former practicing lawyers on staff. And, as you said at the top, I'm a recovering lawyer, and we've got lots more people like me on staff.
You do, yeah.
And we can really work with folks to get them into the right estate planning vehicles for their, what I'll call post-exit lives. And sometimes those vehicles and trusts can be used to minimize taxes and address other issues in connection with a sale. I do want to caveat there, we don't practice law, right? I'm not practicing law anymore. We're not drafting estate planning documents or giving legal advice. But because we have that prior experience and expertise in-house, we can get folks to the right sort of attorneys. We can help walk them through what can be a complicated process and a process that's new to most people. And we can really try to arm them with the knowledge to make them feel good going into those conversations, because some of those vehicles can really make a difference on how the transaction goes and what the ultimate result is for our clients.
Well, and I would think, too, that there are some situations where maybe it could have been a great opportunity prior to the liquidity event, but once the settlement has occurred, they're no longer a vehicle.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Some of this stuff has to be done in advance, right? And if you do it post-transaction, there's certainly things you can do, but it's your world sort of narrows as you get closer to and as you go through the transaction. And so if we can sit down with people, even in that short time frame, in advance of the transaction, it can make a really big difference.
So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's dissect some of these different strategies that you can implement there at TrustPoint, because it really does set you apart. I mean, obviously, it's not just about assets under management that you're after. You really are there to holistically work with and protect your clients from
That's right.
the beginning. I know that from firsthand experience and working with you guys, which is why I love having our affiliation with the podcast, because I think that you're the kind of firm that I would want my clients to use. And so,
well, we really appreciate that. And we think the same about you, Julie. That's for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the different trust instruments and, maybe just a thumbnail on each. I know there's so many different kinds, but I thought this would be a good way for me to segue into that part of our show.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So on the trust and estate planning side, I guess I'd say the first thing with our clients that I notice is they often really don't even have any idea what's available. And that's not shocking, right? It's a world that most people don't enter into. So it's our mission to kind of explain it to them. They may have heard about, trusts or revocable trusts or irrevocable trusts, or some of the what I'll call alphabet soup of the particular estate planning vehicles. But generally, the transaction folks are focused on the transaction, on the business, right? And so those, or it may not just be in their area of expertise. So those folks aren't bringing this information to the business owner. And so when we talk to them, we're really letting them in on some of these vehicles and explaining how some of them might be used, often for the first time. And I think what we see when we do that is some relief, frankly, and some interest. And hey, this is interesting. Maybe it'll work for me. So on the trust side, like you say, I think we could spend hours talking about the specifics of some of these vehicles. And I know you did a detailed deep dive with some of my colleagues last year. So I won't go over any of that ground. And I would just say, hey, take a listen to that podcast. And I don't know the title, but I'm sure it's on your website somewhere. And you can really get some specifics. But a few of the items we raise specifically with our clients in this arena are, one, direct giving. And direct giving is exactly what it sounds like. And this can be something you do before or after a transaction. And the idea is, by giving family members assets, you're removing them from your taxable estate. So it's just what it sounds like. It's saying, hey, we're going to gift these assets to family members, thereby removing them from our taxable estate and potentially reducing estate tax that may be owed down the road. Another one is a little more complex. It's called a gifting to an intentionally defective grantor trust. Right in the name, it's a little more complex, right, than direct giving. So this is an irrevocable trust designed, again, to remove assets from the grantor's estate. And by the way, the grantor is generally the person who creates and funds the trust. And again, you're doing it for estate tax purposes, to reduce the taxable estate for when the time of paying that tax burden comes. And the way this is structured, it keeps the grantor on the hook for income tax payable on the trust assets, and at the same time allows the grantor to retain a certain amount of control over those assets. So it's a little bit complicated, but it can really work in the right situations to make a difference for people in terms of addressing their taxable estate. Similarly, another IDGIT, same idea. It's a sale to an intentionally defective grantor trust. So this is done sometimes when a business may significantly increase in value. When you have the expectation that after the business is going to go way up in value, you'll put the future appreciation of that business within the IDGIT, again, to eliminate it from the taxable estate and get that appreciation over to the beneficiaries so that they can get the benefit of the increased tax basis. All that makes sense so far? Are you with me?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just thinking of different situations. Do you happen to have any that you might be able to slightly illustrate for our listeners around any of these opportunities here?
Yeah, nothing comes to mind off the top of my head. We're working on a couple now, and I don't want to get too specific with them, frankly, because we're engaged with those folks right now, and I don't trust myself to not give it away, to be honest with you. So I'm going to hold back there a little bit. There are two.
I was just going to say, before you go into that next thought, the fact that you're a certified exit planning advisor, right? You're a CIPA like me, really positions you with TrustPoint to be able to focus on these types of owner readiness strategies. When we talk about the distinctions of exit planning, there's two, right? There's business readiness and owner readiness. And this is a classic example of the owner readiness, the owner preparedness strategies and advice that clients, that business owners really need. I mean, it goes way beyond just having a will, right? And a financial plan. So anyway, go ahead.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Throw that out there, yeah.
No, and a really good way to structure it, right? Because you've got to think of the business side, which in our structure is being handled. There's a team there when it's arrived to us, these deals.
Right.
But we're focused on the owner side. That's exactly right. The only other two vehicles I'll mention briefly are grantor retained annuity trust. That's a GRAT, and a charitable remainder trust, a CRT. A GRAT is typically created so the grantors can move appreciating assets to the heirs while minimizing the use of the federal estate tax exemption. And a charitable remainder trust is what it sounds like, right? It's a great option for philanthropic folks that allows them to donate assets to charity while receiving annual income for either for life or for a specific period of time. So those are two more great options. There is one more big category I want to talk about, though, Julie. Setting aside the trusts and that kind of planning, the other big area that we work with people that come to us in this situation is on the financial planning side.
Yeah.
And this is a really critical area for everybody.
Yes.
But in particular for folks approaching an exit or in the process of that exit, to see really what their life is going to look like on the other side of the transaction. And often when people come to us and they're going into these transactions, once we get into this planning, we'll often see substantial relief. They'll start to feel better about what's going to happen. And I think that's because for most of these business owners, they've been running this business maybe their entire lives, right? And the money has been going back into the business. They've been focused on the business. The business has really been the heart and soul of their lives, really, and often the heart and soul of their families. And it's also something that's been within their control. That's worth noting too. And in return, the business has provided them with a good life, a purpose, an income, all those good things. And now all of that is going to change, right? The business may not be there anymore entirely. It may own a lesser portion of the business, be less involved. So there's going to be a big shift from investing and running something that's relatively within my control to investing in the public markets,
Correct.
which is something that's for the most part out of their control. You're exercising much less control and living off the returns from those investments. So this is a new arena for a lot of our business owner clients, and it can be incredibly difficult, stressful without a plan. And so part of our financial planning is really designed to bring people in, educate them, and get them feeling comfortable about this next chapter in their lives. And the process is very, very specific, right? At TrustPoint, we engage, generally speaking, in goals-based financial planning. And that means we really take our time to get to know our clients. And that's really what's necessary. We really want to develop that relationship. We want to understand not just what their financial needs are. Of course, we're planning for needs, but we also want to understand and prepare for what they want their lives to look like after they exit the business. So we try to address wants, wishes, however you want to frame it, and try to push our clients, and this can be hard sometimes, but we try to push our clients to envision how they want their post-exit lives to look so that we can plan for it, right? And
so smart.
Yeah, and sometimes that kind of stuff is fun, once in a lifetime trips, a vacation home, whatever. And sometimes it's more practical. And I'm sure you've seen this too in your practice, Julie, but something we've been seeing a lot lately is wanting to be in a position or be able to help mom and dad in their later years. So mostly we're talking about elder care, right? And that can be a very generous idea, a very loving idea, if you plan for it, because it's also a very expensive idea in many cases. So stepping back from the process, right, when we're entering into that, we're trying to understand what they want their lives to look like. And then we need as much financial information as we can get our hands on. And in these exit transaction situations, that obviously includes the expected net proceeds from the transaction, right? And sometimes that can mean working with their accountant to figure out what that's going to look like, how the taxes are going to affect things, if there are other expenses that the business needs to pay out before they receive their net proceeds, as well as every other dollar of investable assets they have, if they have 401ks or other investments, and other assets. We want to take into account total net worth. So that could mean homes, cabins, rental properties, whatever it might be.
Well, and, because of your training as a CPA, I just bring that up again because it's so important knowing the entire process. Now, I know you're not the only CPA at TrustPoint. Randy's a CPA as well.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And so it's great that you have that lens because there's nothing that gets missed that way. And I'd like to spend more time here if we could, but we don't really have the time other than I just like to ask one more question, and that has to do with like window of opportunity, kind of going back a second here onto, some of the trust instruments that you were briefly explaining. Is there any kind of nuance with any of them, perhaps maybe the most utilized or the ones that you need to know about because, you can't implement them after the fact, they have to be before, or, things like that? Is there anything our listeners need to know if they were going to, and obviously I'm going to ask you at the end too how they can get a hold of you so they can learn more, but just real quick, if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to keep my response simple there and say the sooner the better, right? Because we could start to parse it a little bit, but I don't think it's worth doing. I think the notion there should be if you have any inkling that something like that might make sense for you, or even if you just want to explore it, reach out sooner rather than later, because you're correct. There are going to be some of these strategies that as time progresses, as the transaction progresses, as you make moves in your life, they're going to become either unavailable or less valuable. And it can make a difference to address some of them earlier rather than later. So I know that's a little bit of a broad answer to your question, but I think it makes more sense to keep that simple and say, the sooner you can dive in on this stuff, the better off you'll likely be, because you will have more options available to you the earlier in the process you speak with somebody who can help.
And you don't have to be in exit mode to utilize these strategies either.
Not at all. In fact, some of them work much better if they're done ahead of time, right? I mean, there's no question about it. Some of them involve putting business interests into the estate planning vehicle. So I would say none of this advice, none of this requires you to be on the precipice of exit. In fact, the sooner you do it, the better. You know, I'm positioning it on the precipice of exit because that is often where we come in and start to talk to people, because that's just how it is, right?
Right.
But I totally agree that the sooner you think about these things, you know, and like they taught us when we were studying for our SEPA designations, exit planning is just good business strategy, right? So you can be doing these things all along and addressing both the business side and your personal financial side, even if you don't envision exiting or selling or moving on for some time, because the strategy really aligns with setting your business up for success.
That's right. So any takeaways, any advice, tips?
Okay, I guess first I'd say if you have questions, I'm going to highlight what you said, Julie. If you have questions, give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever works. I'm based in Minneapolis. My number is 612-623-2252. Email's jmarquet@trustpointinc.com. And my biggest takeaway, it's repetitive. I know I've said it before on your pod, but try to sit down, or my action item, try to sit down with a financial advisor in the next 90 days. Even if it doesn't go anywhere after that, it's worth sitting down with somebody who knows. I'd love it if you sat down with us, but sit down with somebody, because then you can start to get a real full picture of what's available, a real full picture of what kind of planning you can do. And I think it's also important to note that when you are going through a transaction, a lot of your advisors are going to be transaction focused. And after the transaction, they're going to fall away. A financial advisor really isn't like that, right? Hopefully, we're going to be involved before, during, and after the transaction. So it can be a meaningful relationship. It can be a helpful relationship. And I'd say try and sit down, put it on your agenda to get a meeting on the books soon to start working on it.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining us again, Jon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
You betcha. And thanks, everybody, for listening. We really appreciate you following us and sharing our episodes. Please do join us again next time.